Minasama konbanwa. Good evening. Welcome to this special Peace Day edition of NextGen JCA, an online series that celebrates the beauty of the Japanese cultural arts and the next generation of artists who practice them. Tonight, we are presenting something a little different from our previous series, a special 1-hour program dedicated to the commemoration of a monumental anniversary. It has been 75 years since the US military dropped the atomic bomb in Hiroshima, Japan on August 6th and in Nagasaki on August 9th, 1945, resulting in the estimated loss of up to 280,000 lives, which includes those who died in the blasts and those who later lost their lives due to radiation sickness. These events left a devastating and lasting impact on hundreds of thousands of survivors and their families. Today we are here not only to commemorate the lives lost and the strength of our survivors, but also to commemorate the pledge for peace. We must continue to make sure history does not repeat itself. We are extremely grateful to have with us tonight a longtime Bay Area resident, 89-year-old Jack Dairiki, to share his experiences as a Hibakusha, or atomic bomb survivor. Jack was 14 years old when he witnessed the death and destruction in Hiroshima firsthand. We'll talk with him later in our program to share in his memories and reflect on ways that we can cultivate hope and peace. If you have questions for Jack, you're welcome to submit them via Facebook Live. For our first presentation, we'd like to start with a short story written by Akiko Takashima, one of the driving forces behind tonight's program. And in reflection of the past and in light of what we are currently living through today, she wrote a story entitled Sadako Naomi, 1,000 Cranes to Build a Wish On. It is told by a few friends, featuring an illustration by the artist Bun and the shakuhachi or bamboo flute played by Brian Mitsuhiro Wong.
Sadako and Naomi, 1,000 Cranes to Build a Wish On, by Akiko K. Takashima. This is a short story based off of the life of Sadako Sasaki and a fictional character, Naomi, used to highlight a medical physician's consultation of real-life potential complications that could arise from the coronavirus.
Naomi was an athlete at her middle school in Texas when word spread out about a coronavirus reaching the United States. She loved swimming, playing soccer, and basketball. She lived life to the fullest, not taking for granted any moment.
When she was 4 years old, she needed a kidney transplant. Her mom and dad were so sad and worried that she wouldn't get one or that it wouldn't take.
One day, while Naomi was in the hospital ward with her mother, a visitor came and read all the kids the story of a girl named Sadako, who survived the bombing of Hiroshima.
Sadako was only 2 years old when the blast threw her out of a window. Her mother ran out to find her and dreaded that she might be dead. Instead, she found Sadako uninjured. Sadako had somehow survived the blast of the bombing, and eventually she would go back to school. She was even an important part of the team relays. Around the time Sadako was only 2 years old, she started to show signs of the effects from being exposed to the Hiroshima bombing. She was hospitalized when her father told her the legend of the cranes, that whoever would fold 1,000 cranes would receive a wish.
This was an idea that stuck with Naomi and her mother. They learned quickly how to fold a crane, or shuru. They both folded cranes together throughout the day. They were determined to fold 1,000 cranes, and soon family and friends got involved in the folding too.
Finally, they reached their goal, and Naomi knew exactly what she was going to wish for. She knew with every grief-stricken expression on her mother and father's face, she needed a transplant and needed to survive. Like a miracle, she got one, and it was successful. Her parents no longer looked so scared or filled with fear, and Naomi got stronger every day. Though she would be on immunosuppressant drugs for the rest of her life, she never complained and would participate in school activities and sporting events just as her other friends would.
One day Naomi went to a party at her best friend's house. There was nothing new. She and her best friend Anna always hung out. Everyone at the party was having a great time. They ate, laughed, gave high fives and hugs, all the while freely conversing as the time raced away. A few days later, Naomi started developing symptoms of the flu. She started to shiver with fever and felt so overcome with nausea that she started vomiting. Her mother and father made an appointment to see the doctor, but the doctor thought it was the flu and sent her home with some prescriptions.
Naomi's symptoms worsened and soon she was coughing and wheezing. Her parents took her back to the hospital. This time, the doctors discovered she had pneumonia. Her parents were very concerned, and the former childhood memories sank in, with the looks on her parents' face returning to dread and sorrow. The doctors kept her in the hospital, and soon she was in acute respiratory distress. Naomi's parents anguished at seeing their daughter so ill. Everyone felt helpless watching this healthy, athletic, kind and fun-loving girl soon placed on a ventilator. Her parents were sick with dread as they watched their daughter's health unexplainably deteriorate so quickly. A few days later, Naomi died.
Like Sadako, Naomi was a middle school child lost too soon due to events out of their control. Sadako was diagnosed with acute malignant lymph gland leukemia, otherwise known as atomic bomb disease. When she died, she was only 12 years old, and she was found to have 6 times the white blood cell count as that of an average child.
Eventually, the doctors would discover Naomi had contracted the coronavirus, and shelter-in-place orders would be announced within the regions of the country. Masks were mandated, and testing would eventually become widespread.
It's estimated that over 280,000 people died as a result of the combined bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, from the effects of the acute radiation exposure and complications of it that would unfold years later.
Today, over 2 times as many people around the world have died as a result of complications from the COVID-19 coronavirus. Let us join together to keep making our 1,000 cranes to remember those who have died due to the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and all those who have passed away from complications from contracting COVID-19. May we all wish for peace for our nations and help for those still standing in the face of this pandemic.
Thank you to the family and friends who helped Akiko's story, who helped bring Akiko's story to life. I know many young people throughout the generations, including myself, have been very touched by the true story of Sadako Sasaki and her 1,000 paper cranes. The crane, or tsuru, has long been a symbol for good fortune and longevity, and when folded into origami, it is believed that your heart's desires will come true, which would explain why paper cranes, or orizuru, are the most popular form of origami. We'd love to have you join us in folding your own cranes, or orizuru, in honor of the victims of the atomic bombings and those we have lost to the coronavirus this year. To help us, I would love to introduce Jun Hamamoto, someone who knows a lot about creating beautiful origami for a cause. Jun is a scientific engineer in the Bay Area and also part of an amazing group, Tsuru for Solidarity, which has done wonderful advocacy work against mass detention centers in the US and stands in solidarity with immigrants and people of color against racial injustice. Over the past 5 years, Jun has also taught the art of origami to inmates at the San Quentin State Prison, and is going to tell us a little bit more about that and show us how to make our own orizuru.
Hi, my name is Jun Hamamoto, and I am an origami teacher at San Quentin Prison, working for the William James Association Arts and Corrections. I've been a teacher there for a few years, but with the art program, but before that, I've spent a total of about 19 years volunteering at San Quentin with a number of different programs. We first did origami at San Quentin about 8 or 10 years ago with a group called Kit Kat, which is a group of men who are serving life sentences for crimes they committed as children. And I joined the World Tree of Hope in San Francisco to fold cranes for world peace and to put up a Christmas tree at City Hall or Grace Cathedral every year. So when I joined that project, I asked the men in Kit Kat if they're interested in folding origami cranes, and I was really surprised at the response. People were really excited about folding the cranes and about the cranes going into the community, and they got to write messages of peace and hope on the cranes, and I was surprised at the enthusiasm and the response. So once I did that workshop, men in a number of different groups and classes asked me to come do a workshop in their class. So that's how origami in San Quentin, came to be. 5 years ago, I started a once-a-week origami class, and we've been folding for memorials of Hiroshima and Nagasaki for a number of years. When Tsuru for Solidarity started to make butterflies, mariposa, to represent freeing people from ICE detention, we started a mariposa project in my origami class, and then with other people at San Quentin that wanted to join it. So we made hundreds of mariposa, which we took to a couple of Tsuru for Solidarity events in the Bay Area. We had an exhibit of the men's origami work at Oakland Asian Cultural Center. That was about 3 months, and in collaboration with Peter Mertz, who did some beautiful portraits of the men and their work. So the men are always looking for projects. If you have a project that you're interested in having our group fold, please contact us and let us know. Thank you. We're going to fold some origami cranes this afternoon in memory of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki 75 years ago. So we're folding Orizuru, and if you want to fold along, I'm going to just do a quick tutorial on how to fold. So if you have some origami paper at home, you want to get it out, or you can use anything. You can take a piece of a magazine or wrapping paper and cut it into a square. It can be any size. The size we usually use is 6 by 6 square. So one of my favorite things that I've gotten for origami cranes are somebody's math homework folded into a crane. So use whatever you'd like. So you're gonna take the paper and we're gonna put it white side up, and we're gonna fold it in half. It's called a book fold. And we're gonna fold in half. Try to make it as accurate as possible. Open it up. You're gonna do another book fold in the other direction. So 2 book folds, you'll get four equal squares. You'll get 4 equal squares. Now you're gonna take your paper and put it colored side up and fold a diagonal fold across. If you match your corners and run your finger down the center and go left and right, you get a pretty accurate fold. So then you're gonna open it up and do another diagonal fold. You'll have a triangle. So match up the corners. It might be easier to do it on a tabletop. Run your finger down, have one hand hold the top, run your finger down the center, and then go left and right. Okay. So this is what you have. You're gonna take and you can push these 2 diagonal corners together. Okay. So here, push them together on the white side, and then you're going to collapse the top and bottom. So collapse the top and bottom. Okay, this is called a preliminary base. So the next step is to make sure that you've got the open side on the bottom. You're going to take the side and bring it to the center line. Like this. And do the other side. So you have a triangle on the top, an open triangle on the bottom. Flip your paper over and repeat. So the open side to the center line. So open side to the center line, the other open side to the center line. Now you have an ice cream cone. You're going to take the ice cream and fold it forward, right at the angle here. So fold it forward. Make a good strong crease there. Okay. And take it and fold it the other direction. You're going to fold it both directions so that it'll be easier. So now you're going to take the ice cream cone with the little triangle in the back. You're going to put it. Keep the ice cream in the back. This will be really helpful. You're going to open the left and right side with the ice cream in the back, because this is the trickiest step in making a crane. And you're going to lift up the top layer and go as far as it will go. You can't go any further because the ice cream is in the back. And then you're going to reverse fold these top folds. They're like this. And on the other side, you're going to do the same thing, but this time you're going to flip the triangle up, open the left and right side, and then take the top sheet of paper, bring it up to that crease line, and push it. It's kind of like opening up into a boat. Start at the bottom and work your way up to the top, and then do the other side. So this is what you have. Have the open side to the bottom or facing you. You're going to take the left and right sides, bring it to the center line, but don't crease it yet. Back it off just a little bit, like about this much, maybe a 1/16 of an inch. So here we go. So you're coming to the center, but not quite to the center, on the left and right side. And then you're going to flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. Take the left and right side, bring it to the center line, leaving a little gap in the center, very small gap in the center. Okay. Okay. So now you're going to pretend that you're reading a book. Flip the page over, then turn the whole model over and pretend that you're reading a book and flip the page over. So the top here is going to be the two wings. Now we're going to make the head and tail. So we're going to take this piece at the bottom and flip it up as far as it will go, and then crease it at the bottom. And flip it over and take the bottom piece up to the top and then crease it at the bottom. Now you're going to pretend that you're reading a book again and flip a page over, turn the model over, flip a page over. Okay, so now we've got the wings on the outside and the head and tail on the inside. Take the head and tail and pull them out to the outer edge of the wing. So pull it out and then pinch. Okay, we're almost done. I like to take the one that looks better and leave that as the tail because it's one straight piece, and then the other side is going to be the head. So you're going to take and just flatten out the tip of the head and push it down and then pinch it together. If you're going to make 1,000 cranes, you're going to leave it flat like this because you're going to string them one on top of each other. But if you want to make a single hanging like these beautiful cranes, you would take the wings and carefully pull them apart. Actually, I like to do it diagonally, apart and apart. So then you get a puffed out crane. So, and here are some examples of some finished cranes that one of my students at San Quentin have folded. So I hope you were able to follow along and make your own origami crane. There's a lot of YouTube videos out there. And there's a really nice one on Paper Tree website that Vicky Mihara made on how to fold a crane.
Thank you so much, June, for the lesson. I did it in real time, and I think it came out okay. Many thanks to Akemi and Kiyoshi Ina and Tsuru for solidarity for allowing us to showcase your beautiful Tsuru in June's video. And special thank you to photographer Peter Mertz, who took those beautiful photos of June, her students at San Quentin, and their work. In our last presentation, before we are joined by Mr. Jack Dairiki, we have a special musical performance of the song Thousand Cranes, written by the talented Jun Kuramoto, featured Koto performer with the Hiroshima Band, and Derek Nakamoto. Joined by a small chorus, a lovely quartet of Koto players, featuring Shirley Kazuyo Muramoto, Isabella Kazuai Lu, Isako Kajun Kashino, and Brian Mitsuhiro Wong, perform it for you tonight. That was so beautiful. Thank you so much to all of you who performed that song. It was really, really beautiful and a lot to reflect on. So we are in our final segment of the evening, and I am very honored to introduce Jack Dairiki, who joins us from San Francisco. And he, like I mentioned, was 14 years old when the Hiroshima bombing occurred in 1945. His story is truly extraordinary. Jack was born in Sacramento, California on Christmas Day in 1930. He grew up in Sacramento, where his parents ran a hotel, and he attended Lincoln Grammar School at the time. And in 1941, when he was 11 years old, Jack's father took him to Japan for the summer to visit his grandfather, whom they had heard had fallen ill. And Jack had no idea he would be stranded in Japan due to the impending war and separated from his family in America for the next 7 years. The Japanese military bombed Pearl Harbor 4 months later, after he arrived in Japan in December 1941, and Jack and his father remained separated from his mother and 4 siblings in California, who were eventually incarcerated at the Tule Lake concentration camp in 1942. Jack continued his schooling in Japan, which was quite a difficult transition, but he did it and was conscripted with his fellow classmates to work in a factory for the Japanese war effort. And that's where he was working when he was 14 years old and living in the outskirts of Hiroshima when the US dropped the atomic bomb. He says, actually, a delayed train saved his life. Had he gotten on an earlier train to the city center that day, he would have been at the epicenter of the blast. And so, Jack, I would love to welcome you onto the show to join me. And thank you so much. We truly appreciate you sharing your memories with us tonight. There you are. Hi, Jack. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for our Peace Day commemoration. And it's so hard for us to imagine what you've gone through, especially as a young child. And we really appreciate you sharing your experiences. And I'd love to start with a question for you. You were only in 5th grade when you and your father went to Japan. And how did it come to be that you were unable to return to the United States? How did you find out that you would probably have to stay there longer than you had planned?
Well, at the beginning of September, my father tried to purchase a ticket back to the United States as previous planned, but we found out there was no ship or ticket available for regular citizens to return to the United States. And we didn't know why, and we didn't know for a decade why this was so. But as you remember, there was war going on in Europe with England and Germany and Italy. And this is one of the reasons that probably the United States feared that there might be something happening in the Pacific Ocean. So what we hear later, a decade later, is that the United States was evacuating civil service people working in Japan for the United States out of Japan. So there was no space for regular passenger. And that was the reason that we learned. So
wow.
That was.
And then you mentioned to us earlier that you were separated from your mother and your siblings, and you were so young, 11 years old, around 11 years old at the time. What was it like to be separated from your family in that way, and how did you and your father cope with that situation?
Well, as we attended Japanese language school when I was in the United States, right after regular grammar school. We used to go to Buddhist church in the neighborhood for Japanese language school. But it was, of course, not being able to use conversation language after school. That was very difficult to learn the language. So when I was in Japan, I was very poor in Japanese language. You barely understood the Japanese people. So there was intensive study. And when we found out I cannot return to the United States, my father said, you have to go to school in Japan. So he took me to the same grammar school where my father went when he was young. And lo and behold, because of my strength of my Japanese language, they put me into second grade. But then they knew that I was in the fifth grade in the United States, so my mathematics and other class of civil service class was known to be in the fifth grade level. So they advanced me to third grade a month later. The intensive study through with my help of my aunt, who was 5 years older than I was, neighborhood school teacher. At night, concentrated study of Japanese language, and I advanced to fourth grade. And that's where I remained, a year behind my age, at the age of 10 at that time. You mentioned 11, I was 10 until December. So that was my situation, going into school at the fourth grade level and trying to catch up with other students to speak the Japanese language.
Wow, that is an incredible effort, especially for someone so young when the situation has changed so drastically. And can you tell us a little bit about Pearl Harbor? You were there in Japan when the Japanese forces bombed Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, and how did that affect what your daily life there in Japan and the communication with your family?
Well, I had an uncle who was also in the Japanese service, and I had an uncle in the United States as well. He was 5 years older than I was, and they both were in one in Japanese Army and one in the United States Army. So maybe perhaps they met each other on the battlefield, but fortunately they both came home safely. But that was a situation that the war in two countries. I was American citizen and almost kind of disguised myself as a Japanese. But people could tell the way your mannerism, you know, that you grew up to your 10 years old. Now when you eat differently, chopstick or knife and fork. And they could tell that you were, even the way you walk, the way you dress, they could tell you're a foreigner. So even in Japanese face, they call me a gaijin, which is a foreigner. And all the neighborhood people knew what we were. We had investigated by the police department, confiscated many of the goods that we took home to Japan, like radio, camera, and so forth. So we were under observation constantly. And that was a lifestyle. And try to myself, hide myself into or live like a Japanese people. And I dressed like a Japanese eventually. And that was my lifestyle. Try to catch up in a Japanese way of living.
Wow. And after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, were you able to get in touch with your mother and your siblings back home? Or what was that like? What was the communication like between the two of you leading, or the two pieces of your family leading very different lives at that time?
You know, it was very interesting that you mentioned we were incarcerated into Turi Lake. I had a brother who was about 8 years old at that time, and he became ill and died in camp. And through the Red Cross, we received a telegram saying, directed to my father, saying, you have a son who died at Turi Lake, California. And my father said, what do you mean Turi Lake? They live in Sacramento. So we had no idea about the concentration camp in the United States. So it was a total loss to us. And that was the only communication we had. We couldn't write letters back and forth anything like that, because it's a war situation. Even with a relative, I mentioned about my uncle being in the service, we couldn't just write a letter and to say how he is. And all we could get is, I'm fine and doing well. And he couldn't tell us where he was. But it's a war secret, the war they were fighting.
And this went on for several years until 1945, when the atomic bomb was dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And can you describe for us that day, starting with in the morning when I think you were about to go to work or trying to catch a train? Tell us about what happened to you that day.
Well, during the 4 years of war now, at the end of 1944, we start to notice a great change in the war situation. So they start to incarcerate or obtain help from students who are 13 years and over. I was 14 then. But we were taken out of the classroom to work for the war effort any way we can. Girl student as well. Girl student worked as a telephone operator or worked in a factory where they made uniform or parachutes and so forth. And for me, I was in the engineering school, so I was able to transfer to Hiroshima from a school in Kure, which was our train ride away. And when I got to Hiroshima, they sent me to work at the Toyo factory, which was one station before Hiroshima. And I used to take the 4:30 train to go to work. It took about 15 minutes to get to my factory. I got on a train place called Nakamoto Station, the Kaitaichi Station, and Mukainada Station, one station before Hiroshima. And it used to take about 20 minutes to get there. But of course, during the war, we had constant bombing raid, as I expected, in anywhere in the country. So we lost Iwo Jima around April of 1945. So we had the American created airport there, and we had constant daily bombing raid in Hiroshima. But interesting that Hiroshima being the 10th largest city, and during the 4 years of war, there was never a bomb dropped in Hiroshima. We had bombing raid for sure, but no bomb was dropped. So the city was pretty much intact. And about before, a month before August the 6th, Kure City was bombed. And they said it took 80 years to build Kure City, which was a industrial city for ships like Candlestick Park. And also they had a Naval Academy school there. And they said a city that took 80 years to build in 2 hours during the night was an incendiary bombing attack. It was disseminated. So they felt Hiroshima would be a next target. So on the 5th of August, or before, the announcement went out that they need helpers to come to the city, volunteers from the farming land surrounding the Hiroshima city, to create a bomb, tear down a block, rows of home to make as a fire stop. Like they did in 1906 earthquake, they purposely created a bomb break so the fire would not continue. So my aunt, who was 19 at the time, she lived near us. She took the 8 o'clock train and got to your working station. But I left at 7:30. So I took the late train, and by then, because of the bombing raid up north of the railroad, the train got delayed by 15 minutes. But because of the 15-minute delay, I assumed I was saved, because soon after the roll call, we were supposed to march into Hiroshima City. That's 8:15 came by. And that's when we noticed the aircraft above us. But interesting again, during the evening, early morning, August 6th, there was a bombing raid at midnight. And sure enough, the alarm went off. People got out of bed into the bomb shelter created in front of their house or the backyard with a pit, with a heavy timber on top, with the earth from below on top. And that would have sufficed if a regular bomb dropped nearby you. So that's what people evacuated, and turned out to be a false alarm. And we have many of these daily false alarm. So it was all clear. People went back to bed. And at 7 o'clock in the morning, there was another raid. And it turned out to be a single aircraft came to Hiroshima. It circled Hiroshima and turned out to be a weather reconnaissance aircraft. And it flew over Hiroshima. Hiroshima was fogged over like San Francisco is. And then was flying away to go to the next bombing city, which was Kokura down south. But as they were leaving, they saw a break in the cloud drifting toward Hiroshima. So they said, this would be Hiroshima target. So it cranked the phone in the aircraft and radioed 3 aircraft following behind, which was the Enola Gay, which carried the atomic bomb. So when 8:15 came by, it was all clear. We saw the aircraft above us and wondering, why isn't there an alarm going? But we don't know why. Well, as we watched the aircraft approaching us, we studied the direction the aircraft be flying. And if it come right to you, you're in danger because it will be line of bomb. But it would turn away about 5 degrees into Hiroshima City. And that's when 8:15 came by. The bomb exploded. They said it weighed about 4 tons, weighed similar to a bull elephant. And they said the aircraft, Enola Gay, jumped up 10 feet because of the lost that weight. And they hovered. Wow. It came down, and about a mile above Hiroshima, it exploded. And a tremendous flash. So we were in an area with no signal of alarm going, with 3 aircraft above us. And we wondered, why is there not an alarm going? But that was a question for us to discover later. So when that flash went off, I instinctively fell on the ground, covered my eyes with 4 fingers and the thumb in the air. This was done during the year of war. It's trained that if you have a bomb drop nearby you, the blast will cause a vacuum. It will pop your eyeballs out in the eardrum. So that's why you're protected. If it's flat, to avoid any flying debris. Sure enough, I weighed about 100 pounds, and I felt like my body was floating. And all the windows in the factory, 99% of it blew out. And I only weighed 100 pounds, but I feel like I was floating in the air. And I opened my eyes, couldn't see anything because of smoke and dust around us. Then I heard a fellow student start to run toward the bomb shelter created for us, and about 1,000 yards away. I ran to it, and when it came to the bomb shelter entrance, I looked back. It was elevated ground, so you could see over the factory building, and saw the familiar mushroom cloud. And Hiroshima City was covered with smoke and fire, and from the center of the mushroom cloud, you saw flare jumping out like fireworks. And that was the image I saw and drew of it. And so
Yes, I was going to mention that later on during your studies, I think at UC Berkeley, you were taking architecture courses and you decided you needed to learn to draw, and you were drawing a painting of the mushroom cloud of the bomb.
That's correct.
And then your teacher found out that you had been a survivor. And I'm curious, you know, you mentioned there were many alarms and some false alarms for bomb scares earlier, even that morning. But when you saw the mushroom cloud, did you have any idea what that might be? What were you thinking that it was in that moment? I mean, I think a lot of people were prepared to take shelter, as you said, from standard bombs, but this was something entirely different.
Yes, as we know, the Manhattan Project, as it was called in the United States, it took several years to build, cost $2 billion under President Roosevelt. And President Roosevelt died in April of 1945. Truman took over, and he had no idea what there was. It was such a secret, and many people in the United States didn't know anything about it. So it was really a secret. Even the bombing crew of Enola Gay did not know what they were doing until it was mentioned a few minutes before they released the bomb. The captain of the bomber mentioned we were carrying a secret weapon, and all the crew were given a cyanide pill to carry, and if they were shot down before the bomb was released, they didn't want any secret to go out, so take the cyanide pill to commit suicide, not the secret to go out. And this was only the second bomb. The first bomb was just a testing bomb in the Ngorongoro desert. So it was really a secret, and they didn't want Russians to know what we are doing. So when the time came to almost invade, Truman, Churchill, Stalin was in a meeting, and Truman mentioned after getting a phone call that success was achieved by the first testing of the atomic bomb. We have created atomic bomb. So he told the Russians not to invade Japan anymore, because we have the secret weapon that we could use against you. And that's one of the warnings they gave. So everything was very secret. Nobody knew. And even the crew, they were assigned later that they would take picture of what they saw, and it was amazed with what they saw. And they said, this is really a depth of hell they were looking in. And
on that note, can you describe for us what you witnessed after the bombing? I think you were trying to take shelter for several hours before you were able to try to walk home. And then the searches among the many who are still living for family commenced, and your father was looking for you, and then you were also looking for your aunt. Tell us more about your experiences after the bomb was dropped.
Well, as I mentioned, that we had a call for the laborers around the Hiroshima city to come to help on this clearing of the fire break. And my aunt was gone. And I told my father that we would be doing the same thing that morning, that we would be assembling at the factory, but from there we were supposed to march into the city to create this fire break. So my father knew where I might be, and he acknowledged that. But my father, who worked in the city that day, or every day, he had a visitor from Osaka, so he played hooky and he stayed home. And that visitor saved my father's life. And for me, as I mentioned, the train was delayed 15 minutes. That's where I was saved. So my father came to the factory when the bomb exploded, and he tried to inquire where I was, and everyone was running in a circle. So he assumed that I marched into the city. So he started to go down the highway against a drove of people escaping from the city. He came to a bridge, and they stopped by the MP. Nobody to enter the city. People are escaping from the city, not entering the city. So my father waited till the river tide to subside, and waded across the river and started looking for me, one body after body, and the clothes were burned off. The body was burned by the flash of the bomb. So if I didn't answer back, he just kept on going and came to rivers in Hiroshima. There's 7 rivers in Hiroshima, and all the river was covered with dead people. And so that was the image that he saw. And he finally came home on 9 o'clock that night. And for me, I was able to leave the factory, because if you're not injured, able to walk, live away from the city, you could leave. That was the first instruction we got. So I got to the highway, and and we saw droves of people of all types of injury. Now you realize Hiroshima City was the 10th largest city in Japan, Tokyo being number 1. And we had 55 hospitals in Hiroshima City. That was quite a big city. But out of 55, 53 hospitals were burned, unusable. And so only 2 or 3 hospitals were usable. And there were 200 doctors assigned to Hiroshima City. Only 20 survived. There were 2,000 nurses, only 700 so survived. So you could see that, and then enormous damage had done to the city. And that was the situation. Now, there was a question that at my age of 14, what kind of work did I do? I was an engineering student, so we were trained to work with a lathe and to make a part for rifle making machine, which our factory was designed to make rifle and airplane parts. And as you know, Germany, Italy, and Japan called 3 axis were formed together to fight against the United States. So as 1945 came, Germany started to lose the war. So we couldn't get any machine parts from Germany. So we have to make our own. And that was my assignment at the factory at the age 14. So that's how it was. And we had no idea. Nobody heard about atomic bomb. It was such a secret around the world. And the United States trying to keep it a secret, the Manhattan Project. And,
right. And Jack, your memories are so vivid, and I so appreciate, like everyone else watching, you sharing this with us tonight. And it's hard to believe based on how you've been able to recall that very day, that 75 years have passed since that day, since the bombings of both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we'd like to ask you, what message would you like to impart for the next generation as a hibakusha or survivor?
Well, as you know me, there's a peace park Hiroshima was created, and there's this huge stone with a carving with a poem on it. It says, "Please rest in peace, for this error shall never be repeated again." And this is a pledge to the living people around the world, never to have another atomic bomb be used in the world. As I mentioned, my aunt, on 19, half her body was burned, and she was sponsored by the Quakers, United States, and came to the United States in 1964 to show her injury. The right half of the body was burned, her arm was bent and never to be able to stretch. Her finger was fused together, and they had surgically separated, but never stretched out. That was how she lived. And she went to throughout the United States, England, and Germany to show this scar. And this is what happened when the atomic bomb was used. So it was education to all of us, wherever we went. And for me, right in the midst of the casualty, people dying daily, and all the different injury without a hospital and doctor care, many people suffered. And we had funeral piles daily. It smelled of the dead people around us. And something that people do not realize, when you have 80,000 people die in a crack of sound, and how could you even imagine what it's like? So we're constantly reminding people never to use this atomic bomb. We had city like Chernobyl, where they had accidental explosion of uranium plant that make electricity. And first thing was said, no people to live there for 100 years. And same thing was same with Hiroshima. Nobody to live there for 100 years because of the radiation effect on the ground. And we had Sendai in 2011 and a 9-point earthquake, and devastated the city with a tidal wave coming in. And you could not bury your loved one because of the radiation effect, poison on the ground. And it's still the same way. So there's something that atomic bomb does, the radiation, poison to the body and the ground. So we constantly learn about it. we, the survivor, get examined by the doctor that come from Hiroshima every 2 years. We used to have 200 patients come to the examination. The last year we had only 30 survivors to come to the exam. People couldn't come, yeah, and people died by then. So I was traveling in Japan, so I had my physical exam done in Japan in October. And that's how it is, as you know.
Yeah, it's an incredible burden to bear, and it takes so much bravery for you and the other survivors to continue to share this story, the horrific things that you went through and witnessed. It takes so much courage. And we have some Facebook Live questions. You've spent so many years speaking out about this and your experiences to help other people understand the atrocities and why we need to pledge to never use the atomic bomb on any population ever again. And a question for you was, before the pandemic, were you still active in doing talks at schools? Tell us about some of the things that you have done to share with others as a survivor.
At school, of course, from grammar school, high school to college, they learn about the Second War and how it ended. So I'm constantly on the phone. They call me, contact, could you come to speak to the class? And I have done that every year. And I presently speak at the University of San Francisco in the philosophy class under Dr. Professor Nutting. And he invites me twice a year to speak to his class and about the experience of my atomic bomb. And that's one of my duty. And I'm very active in my Buddhist church, and I taught Sunday school for 50 years. They honor me for that. And partly because like ingrained, message I have to give, and a love for the humanity and people who I'm surviving because 80,000 people died for me, and that's how I feel. And I have a tremendous message to give out to people, and only the people who truly went through this experience can talk about it sincerely. And it's something that you never experienced because it never been used, fortunately. And we constantly being threatened by North Korea. They'll be bombing us, and through the North passageway they calculated to Washington, D.C. It's only 6,500 miles. To Chicago, 6,000 miles. San Francisco, 4,500 miles. So we are constantly under threat of the atomic bomb being used. And
we must stay vigilant.
Yes. So it's really frightening. And I wake up every morning and grateful that I'm still alive again. But in Buddhism, they say there's no such thing as tomorrow, only today. And you have to do whatever you can to live a good life today. And so when I heard that, you are very grateful and say, anybody I meet, I will say, good morning, how are you? And be very friendly because tomorrow will never come. That's how the Buddhist people learn to talk. Tomorrow, never look for tomorrow because this is your last day.
Thank you so much for that message. I think a lot of us need to hear that, especially during this time and this year when a lot of us are sheltering in place and worried about the current pandemic. And it's so important to be grateful for every day. And that is a beautiful message, Jack. Another Facebook Live question. Someone was wondering if you participated in any ceremonies in Japan last week for Peace Day. I don't think you were able to travel, but maybe you have in the past. But how did you commemorate personally the past Peace Day last week?
I never have done anything in Japan. Only thing I do is a memorial service about my relatives. My aunt, as I mentioned, is still alive. She's 94, and she does the same thing I do. I'll put on television, show her injuries, and saying this is what happened when an atomic bomb is used. So we both, cherish each other, encourage each other to speak up and educate the public what atomic bomb does. And again, it's atomic bomb. It's not a bomb, but also a poison bomb with radiation in the air and doesn't dissipate. And as we know, we go to a dentist, we put a lead shield on the body to take an X-ray on the mouth. And that's how critical it is to protect your body from radiation. So
absolutely. And our last question from Facebook Live, someone is wondering, in your talks at schools or with the public, have you ever been challenged by those who may have said the bombings were justified? And if so, how do you react to that kind of sentiment?
I think it's just the ignorance of people. And before the bomb was being used, when it was completed, Eisenhower and Naval Admiral went to President Truman, said, you don't have to use this bomb. Japan is trying to surrender June or July of 1945. But that message was stopped somehow. It didn't get to Truman, or he had it and he ignored it. And that's the sad part of it. So Truman had on his hand, maybe 5 million people died because he then stopped the bomb. He could have stopped, but he's saying that he spent $2 billion for Manhattan Project, and he had Korea trying to invade Japan. And if he invaded Japan, if the war wasn't able to surrender, it would leave another 500,000 American soldiers as well as Japanese people. So these are the things that went through his mind, but he could have stopped it. And why he didn't do it, this is a big question for the history. So it's very sad. It does come out in the newspaper now and then that Japan were trying to surrender, and because American people, army, decoded the Japanese code. They knew exactly what was happening in the during the war in Japan. So that's another sad story. Why didn't Truman use the bomb? It's a big question.
Right. And I think that is, I'll leave you with one last question, Jack, and thank you so much for your time here tonight. It's such an honor to speak with you. What is your last message to everybody watching? How do you suggest we show our solidarity for peace and in standing with those victims lost to these bombings, and to survivors like you? How can we stand in solidarity with you and maintain that pledge for peace?
Well, first thing is education. Education, what atomic bomb is and what it does to all the people. So knowing that, we'll be more impressed never to use atomic bomb, because once you use, we have a thing called atomic atmosphere. It will be clouded over for almost a year, and no sun will penetrate through that atomic cloud, and nothing will grow, and it will be living under like a cold fog the whole year, and people who are living there be in misery. And of course, you can't be breathing the air because it's contaminated. And this is the situation that we live. And so more we educate ourselves, it's impossible to say we're going to use atomic bomb to launch an enemy. But Earth is turning. Well, the thing that happened in Chernobyl, we had a reading in Seattle, Washington. And as the Earth turned, the reading come back to Chernobyl. And because in 24 hours, you come back to the same place. So when you say you're going to launch a bomb to the enemy, is like spitting in the air. It comes right back to your face. And that's a horrible, horrible thought that you have. And more we understand this type of situation. The Earth is small, only 25,000 mile circumference. So Pacific's only 5,000 miles. United States of America is only 3,000 mile wide. So, it's really impossible to say you're going to launch the missile to an enemy territory and not, you can't forget about it because it's coming back to you eventually. So
right. Yes, I think what you're saying is we're so much more connected and interconnected than we realize. And on that note, thank you so much, Jack, for sharing your memories with us. Domo arigatou gozaimashita.
Domo arigatou. Thank you.
We so appreciate the courage and the bravery and the determination you've exhibited throughout your life after this experience to make sure that we have that education, and it is so priceless. I hope that you continue to be well during this pandemic. And I want to say arigato to everyone else for joining us in our commemoration of Peace Day. To end, we want to offer our virtual Niji, or Rainbow Obon dance, in honor of those who passed away 75 years ago, and in honor of those who passed away this year as well due to the coronavirus. We hope you all remember to keep peace in your hearts. Thank you so much for joining us.